So, welcome everybody to this month's Womancraft Publishing book group, which is on Mother in the Mother by Pippa Grace. And the title of today's discussion is Our Mothers Ourselves, Creative Approaches to Generational Healing. And I think that gives a really good little glimpse as to what the book is about. So I'd like to just hand over to Pippa to introduce herself, because I think it's nicer to hear from the authors themselves as to what they're up to now and how they came to write their book, what their background is. So Pippa.
Hi everyone, lovely to be here and see you all. So yeah, my name's Pippa. I'm a socially engaged artist, which means pretty much that I work with people and communities, and I'm interested in people's stories, particularly women's stories, and the stories that tend to get sort of silenced or not heard or sort of pushed into the background. I'm really interested in hearing those stories and bringing them to light and doing that in a creative way. I'm based in Bristol in England, and I'm a mum to two girls, and it's quite funny to think about their ages, because when I began this book actually began as an arts project, and it began when my younger daughter she wasn't one at that point, she was, you know, sort of baby. I was like on sleepless nights and full of adrenaline and decided to start an arts project. And they're now, she's now 11 and my older one is 16. So it's just interesting to see how the project has progressed over that time. And then the book was published in 2019. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And a lot of the work that I do now tends to be similarly with women, maybe less so with mums. I think I've sort of come out of that phase a bit, but I've been looking at different sorts of women's stories and collecting those and just finding interesting visual ways for people to express their stories. So I hope that kind of gives you a little flavor of what I do.
And I do recommend, if you are on Instagram, that you go and check out Pippa's Instagram, because she does the most beautiful clay sculptures, usually of women, sometimes of animals. And they are so stunning. They're so sensual and just tactile. You just want to kind of stroke your hand over them. They're just curved and flowing, really beautiful. So do check her out on that, and we've shared one of them on the Womancraft Instagram page in the last week. So yes. So would you like to give us a little overview of how the project started, the project that eventually became the book Mother in the Mother? Because I love you do introduce it in the book, and I love the story behind it and the cake.
Yeah, there was always a lot of cake. So yeah, like I say, I'm a mum to two daughters, and I'm also estranged from my own birth family. And when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I think I'd been largely estranged from my birth mother for about 5 years. And it wasn't until I was pregnant that I really, really felt the depth of that lack. And then when I had my daughter, I had I think I had quite a lot of gas and air, to be fair, during the labour, but I had one of those really profound moments just as I gave birth, where I had this sort of sense of being connected to all the women that had gone before and all the women that potentially came in front. And I imagined, as I sort of birthed my daughter, it was almost as if I could already imagine her birthing her child in the future. And later on, I learned that the egg that becomes you exists in the fetus that is your mother when she's inside your grandmother. And that literally blew me away, that the sort of idea that the three bodies at one point are sort of all connected, and seemed to make some sense to me about this sort of way that I felt this deep connection, both backwards and forwards. And then a few years after that, there was a point when my maternal grandmother, she'd had a stroke and she was in hospital, and I'd always been really close to her. She'd looked after me quite a lot when I was growing up. And so I went back, even though I had this sort of very tricky relationship with my birth family, I went back and was, you know, sort of around the hospital quite a lot while she was there. And my daughter would have been about 2.5 at this time. And we were all there in the hospital together. And again, it struck me, there was 4 members of this maternal line all there in the hospital at the same time. And it was just for that bit of time, no one, the sort of the estrangement and the things that had led to that didn't really matter. There was something bigger going on, and it felt very, very powerful. And yeah, I just came away with some very powerful words that then became the sort of the early introduction to this book. And yeah, like I say, shortly after my second daughter was born, I don't know, I just had this energy about me of just thinking, I want to do something with this. I want to turn this into a project. I want to explore motherhood and people's journeys of motherhood, but not just that journey on its own, but to see it in the context of the mother that comes before, and maybe the grandmother that's come before that, looking back and back, looking at the inheritance, and also considering how those relationships go forward. And so, sorry, yeah, that began, that was the beginning. That was the arts project beginning. That was my idea. And I gathered together a group of mums, and we started talking about our experiences and our mums and our grandmothers. And over time, I gathered funding, and over the course of the project, worked with about 300 mothers collecting their stories. And it became a visual arts exhibition to begin with. But we also collected together some of the written stories, and people really loved the book and said, you know, where can we buy the book? And at the time, it was just something I'd printed up online. You know, there was 2 or 3 copies. So people wanted to purchase the book. And so then I thought, okay, so this is a bit more of a project here. This involves, I did some more work, ran some more projects, got some more people's stories, and then came and found a publisher, and yeah, got it published and got the book out into the world.
How did it feel having a book that was such a personal project and had such personal meaning to you, and probably something that was very maybe something you hadn't shared a huge amount and suddenly was out in the world? How did that land with you?
Yeah, it felt like exposing. It felt like I just didn't know quite how much of my own story to share. And all the previous arts projects I'd worked on had always been around storytelling, but they hadn't centered around my story. And it was this tricky sense of like, how much do I convey of what's there for me, whilst holding space for other people to share their stories. And as the project developed, so I felt able to tell more of my own story. And people reflected back that actually that was helpful and powerful to do that. And I think it's probably sort of in the long run been quite an empowering and quite an important thing to do. But it hasn't felt comfortable all the time. It's felt quite, you know, like sort of being out in the world without my skin on at times. It's felt that level of sort of vulnerability, and yeah, just really found that quite hard to manage.
I get that feeling. For me, it's not without a skin on it. It's like I'm walking around and I haven't put my clothes on, and everyone else is fully dressed, and I'm there like, hey, feeling a bit naked and yeah, exposed. So I really hear that, and I know that well myself. So what I really liked about the book was that you really had explored, or rather got people who had experienced many different experiences of motherhood. You know, people who had good relationships with their own mothers, people who had tricky relationships with their own mothers, people who had planned their children, people who hadn't planned their children, people who had wonderful births, who had tricky births, who had easy bonding, who had real ambivalence about being a mother, as well as women from many different socioeconomic and racial backgrounds as well, different people from really quite a few different walks of life. How was it to kind of seek out those stories and kind of empower women to speak who might not have maybe felt comfortable sharing their stories because they didn't have the perfect story of motherhood, what we expect it should look like? Was that tricky? Like, were people reticent in coming forward, or were they the people who were most likely to be drawn to these workshops?
In some ways, yeah, they were the one. I mean, I think sometimes people, when there was a challenging thing there, were actually, yes, drawn to come and to talk about it. So one of the groups that I ran was for women whose mothers had died sort of before they themselves became pregnant, or maybe, you know, quite early on in their childhoods, but so, you know, they weren't there. And that group just formed really naturally. And this sort of group of women obviously wanted to tell those stories. And again, actually, when I ran one around people who had challenging or estrangement, you know, sort of challenging relationships or estrangement with their mother. And again, it actually felt like in some ways that those were the almost easier ones that people really came forward there, maybe because they were trying to work through something. I think getting the, you know, trying to sort of work in a way that was culturally diverse, at times that was more tricky. And also I worked with a group of young mothers who had their children when they were young. And again, that was maybe one of the harder age groups, I think, because there wasn't the same level of distance and time to reflect in some ways on their own relationship with their mother, because it was all happening right there and then, kind of thing. But again, they were a really amazing group to work with. And I think being able to work with so many different women was one of the real joys of the project. And I think without that, because I could have easily just sort of stayed within quite a small circle of, you know, kind of friends and contacts, and quite easily, but it felt that really important to try and reach out as much as possible, and to hear all sorts of different stories, and also to consider that it's not always a biological relationship, that some people see their mother as, you know, it might be their auntie, or it might be a friend who's got the strongest maternal relationship, or some people were adopted, or they'd adopted their own children, or there was fostering. I think it was a term that I started to call other mothers, you know, that there are often other people in our lives who become the sort of main maternal figure. It doesn't have to be a biological relationship. And I really wanted to remain inclusive so that people didn't think, oh, my story is a bit difficult, or I don't quite fit. It was kind of like, you know, if you want to share your story and be part of this project, then yeah, please do come and get involved.
And oh my God, I'm sorry, my brain is blanking. It was there. The question was there. Oh my goodness. I love migraines. Yeah, it was around taboos. Were there any particular kind of aspects or elements of either mothering or being mothered that seemed to be taboo, that people didn't want to go there and would kind of need to be encouraged to look at or share that part of their story?
I think one of the main ones was people, and this came up right at the beginning of the project, was people talking about their own ambivalence or difficulty in being a mum. And that just felt so taboo. I think maybe particularly because the women, a lot of the people I was around in the early phases had quite young children, and it just felt that you can't say that, you know, you can't say, actually, I'm struggling, or actually, you know, I don't want to do this, or I'm not sure if this is, you know, what I want to be doing, and I'm finding this really difficult. And I remember having my own kind of taboo at that point around that. I'd had extreme anxiety with my first daughter when she was born, and kept having these sort of horrible images of her feeling like, you know, that I kept seeing her sort of having an accident or something, you know, kept going round and around my brain. And I'd never spoken to anyone about it. I thought it was some weird quirk that was coming up just for me. And it was one of those amazing things that when I shared that, then so many other people shared a similar thing. And I realized that it's actually, quite common. So I think that was definitely one of the larger taboos, was people who, felt like they were struggling with their own, relationship with being a mum. Whereas people maybe found it easier to talk about having problems to do with the mothering that they'd received growing up. Again, not always. It wasn't always an easy thing for people to do, but was maybe a bit less challenging than maybe saying, I don't feel like a good mum at the moment, or something like that.
Yeah. I wonder, I think as women, we probably find it easier to talk to other people about our mothers, but to be able to talk to our mothers about the issues that we might have, the places where we don't quite connect, I'm looking and thinking, I'm really grateful my mum isn't here on this one. But that is tricky to articulate, because we can usually tell a friend or a therapist or a partner about struggles that we might have in understanding our mothers, but actually having that dialogue with them and being able to kind of move past blockages in relationships can be really tricky. Did you get any feedback from women after they'd taken part in this as to if it had shifted anything in their relationship, either with their mothers or with their children?
Yeah, that one of the wonderful things about this project was that the whole thing with the publication of the book included is that it spanned over 10 years, and it's kind of enabled me to keep in touch with people, or people will let me know how things have developed, and all sorts of different things have come out through it. Someone who felt that she was managing to heal some things in her relationship with her mum later on went on and actually decided that she needed more separation from her mother to be able to healthily raise her own children. Other people found that they were able to open up conversations with their mothers that they never thought that they would be able to. And I think other people were able to, this was a sort of common theme in the book, was that they were able to appreciate their mothers in their way that they were grandparents to their children, and to see that relationship developing. And I think that again was something that's fed back to me over time, of seeing how, I think through doing the project and having the space and time to reflect on their relationship, that they were able to navigate some of the more challenging areas, and in places to open up new ways of conversation and communication, but never it never feels really straightforward or really easy. I think everyone who's done that, it's been a challenging journey, and it's sort of ebbed back and forward. It's not like it's been a linear direction. It's been something that's had its kind of I don't know, had a sort of tidal nature to it, where it's the tide's sort of been coming in and out, and there's been times when they've found more connection and times when they've had to step back more. And but it's really lovely to hear from people sort of down their journeys. And I suppose the one thing that does tend to come up consistently is people finding that through doing the work, that they have a richer relationship with their own children and with their own sort of parenting and relationship to their children. And that's just been really joyful to hear, and really beautiful.
Thank you. That's really lovely to hear that reflection, because obviously, for me, these are just, people on pages. They're not, real humans who I've met and kind of have got to see and hear from kind of during their process. So it's really lovely that you do have that kind of continuity of connection. And something just to say, as a publisher and an editor, was one of the tricky things about putting together a book like this is Pippa has a beautifully intellectual but also very emotionally connected voice, and is very, very insightful about her writing, and is a very natural writer. But obviously not all of the people in this book would necessarily write even perhaps for pleasure. And so we have many, many, many different voices who, if we were sitting talking in a group, you wouldn't necessarily kind of pick out like who's a writer and who's not a writer. Do you know what I mean? Whereas when you're on a page, it's trickier to balance all these different qualities of writing and characters and personalities and stories and voices. So that was definitely a tricky thing about putting together a book, to try and, you know, kind of balance out in a way the difference of voices, whilst at the same time really allowing each woman to fully kind of be herself. And you get this sense that you are sitting in a circle of women, each one sharing different experiences in a different voice. But as a reader, that can be trickier. So that was definitely something that we kind of, you know, struggled with a little bit and kind of had backwards and forwards about, because it's how do you honor the voices and at the same time make a good reading experience. The other thing that we really had great fun with was picking the images for the book and figuring out how the images went with the book, because obviously not everybody is writing under their actual name, and so we don't want to share images next to somebody in order to identify them. But there were some really beautiful images of the women with their children, of women with their mothers, of 3 generations together, meaningful items. And it was really lovely to be able to include those in it, to give it a kind of a scrapbook effect, to give you the visual of being in this circle of different women. And at the same time, again, there was that trickiness of, you know, these people aren't professional photographers. And so the photographs aren't, you know, necessarily all of the same quality or of the same standard, or, you know, so it was really tricky again to have that, to gather this together in a sense that it felt like you were there in the circle of women, rather than it just being a kind of a record of a project that had already happened. So how can we make this feel like a living, breathing circle of women all together? And how can we then make you feel part of this circle too, which is very much why we have the exercises at the end. So we have Pippa leading you in at the beginning to give you an overview of the project, of the work, of why and how. We have the circle of women, and then we have the creative exercises so that you can become part of this circle of women doing this creative work. So I hope that that comes across well, and that kind of you get that sense when you're reading it, because obviously trying to structure something that was, you know, work with 300 different women plus, you know, into a cohesive body of work was a really interesting challenge, and very different to anything we've done before. So yeah. Would you like to read us something from it, please, Pippa?
Yes, let me have I think I picked something out. It was, yeah, this is quite near the beginning of the introduction, so I'm not repeating anything I've already said, but I'll give it a go. This was where I'm sort of introducing some of the themes that we talk about. The role of mother is frequently taken for granted. The mother archetype is so fundamental within our lives and to our sense of self that as infants and children, we rarely see the person behind the position. Over the project's duration, I had the privilege of hearing stories from a range of mothers. Running through these unique personal stories are the threads of universal patterns and themes. Some women spoke of how motherhood has transformed their lives and their relationship with their mothers. And this woman said, "We got into a 20-year battle of miscommunication, but finally we resolved. We found each other. Motherhood brought us together again. It reopened the channels of communication between us." Another theme was of women consciously choosing to parent differently. "I want to be different than my mother was. I want my daughter to be able to confide in me and learn positive things from me." It became clear through all of the stories that each woman, as she becomes a mother, found herself either consciously or unconsciously re-evaluating her relationship to her own mother, and frequently wanting to reconnect with this relationship in some way. In her best-selling book, What Mothers Do, Naomi Stadlen describes how many women, when they learn they are pregnant, describe an urgent need to contact their own mothers. She explores the root to this incredible longing that so many women describe, even those who previously felt estranged from their mothers. I myself had been largely estranged from my mother, for some 5 years prior to the birth of my first daughter. My pregnancy was part of a new life, looking into the future and forming a new family with my partner. Yet, from the moment I found out I was pregnant, I craved a mother figure in my life. I found the pain of the lack almost unbearable. I was gifted with a wonderful mother-in-law and an amazing aunt, but nothing quite filled that direct biological space created by estrangement from my own mother. When a friend and her mum took me shopping for maternity bras, her mum insisted on paying, and in that act of generosity, I felt the loss acutely. The gravitational pull back to the woman who had carried me through pregnancy was immense.
Just in that short space, you cover so many aspects of what a mother is. You know, a mother is physically there. She's the person who physically carried us and cared for us. A mother is an archetype. A mother is an energetic, caring, loving presence. A mother is financial help and support when you need it. Like, mothers fill so many different roles, and not every mother fills every one of those roles. They can't. We can't. We're human beings, and we all have, you know, our strengths and our weaknesses, our lacks and our abilities. And so it's just really important to articulate all of those different aspects of what we expect from mothers, what we expect from our own mothers, what we expect from mothers in society, and what we expect from ourselves when we think, I'm being a good mother or I'm not being a good mother. Like, what is it that we're judging as being lacking? Because there are so many aspects and elements that are required in motherhood and at each different stage of motherhood.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the sort of Winnicott phrase, the good enough mother, that came through really strongly around sort of ideas of attachment and things. And it's something, again, almost like when we were talking about this idea about taboos that I heard mum sort of talk about again and again. It's like, you know, am I good enough? Am I doing this well enough? And was I myself, but also other people I've worked with, was I parented well enough? Yes, people may have done their best, but was it enough? And you know, it's a strange sort of unquantifiable amount in a way, you know, what is enough? But I think I think people do actually have a sense of that. And it was very powerful to see the women that I worked with who I think had enough. I think this one woman in one of the stories talks about this idea that her cup was full. Her mum died before she had her children, but she said that because she had been mothered, her cup was full. And when she went on to birth her sons, she had this maternal love to pass on to them. Whereas other women that I worked with lacked something very fundamental. And it was this sort of almost like something very core that wasn't there, and a foundation that just didn't exist for them. And they were mothering their own children without having that something behind them. And yeah, I think I just found that very profound and quite hard to describe, but something that really struck me during the project, the sort of the difference in those qualities of maybe that concept of what is enough.
And I think what makes it really tricky is, in patriarchal culture, woman and mother have been combined as the same thing. To be a good woman is to be a good mother. A good woman must be a mother. And this essentialist thing of, if you are not a good mother, then you are not a good person, you are not a good woman. And feeling like you are failing in any point of motherhood can feel such a core wounding, because it's like, I'm supposed to be good at this, so if I'm not good at this, then what am I? Which is ridiculous, but that is what is put on women's shoulders. This demand to be everything, to be more than, to be better than, to be the perfect mother. And it is such an enormous expectation on all women's shoulders, especially when we are all going through it in our own life circumstances, based on what we got from our own mothering, like how our lives are at that point with our partner, with our finances, in the culture that we're living in, you know, whether we're in a place of war or peace in the nation that we're, you know, like it's an incredible amount on any woman's shoulders to give birth to a child or to adopt a child and to care for that child before adding all of that stuff on. You know, there has to be leeway in the expectations that we place on ourselves and that are placed on women, that, you know, if you are mothering in a bomb shelter, or if you are mothering in a refugee camp, or if you are mothering and your own mother has just died, that's going to be a very different experience to if you are doing it with all the resources you need, all the time you need, all the support you need. Very different. And yet there is this expectation that we must always be perfect.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot to do with the archetype, and it's just there's so much attached to that mother archetype, and the sort of sense of, yes, that it has a sort of like almost like a ring of perfection around it or something, and that it's got to be all, like you say, all encompassing, and everything needs to be there, and that's not reality. That's something else that we're, you know, often trying to live up to, and I think ultimately it's actually unhelpful for women to, you know, to have that as this sort of idea of, you know, then, because then you're always living a I'm not good enough, or I'm not doing well enough, and that's, you know, that doesn't benefit the children or the mum. So
no. And what I love in the book is that you make space for the mother role being filled by more than just one woman. You know, that there is a community out there. It might be sisters, friends, aunts, grandmothers, but, you know, that there are people to share that role with, and, you know, that we can also receive our mothering from. If our mothering has not come in the way that we needed it from our own mothers, that there are other women and people of all genders out there who can support and love and nurture us.
yeah, I think I use, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think there's a metaphor that I use of this idea of a river of maternal love, and the idea is that we generally sort of see this sort of flowing down through the generations. And I kind of enjoy the metaphor and think.
I love the metaphor. Please do
go for it.
share it in case people don't remember it.
Just the idea that you know, it's like a river, and it can, like any river, become sort of blocked or stagnant or dry up, but that there's a force behind it, and that we, like you're saying, we will find those mother figures and find that river that will course through from other places if we can't find it directly from our own mother. And I guess that was my experience, you know, growing up. I found other people who to some extent fitted in that role, and yeah, I think that I suppose the idea is that it's bigger than, you know, any one person or any family. This concept of maternal love, this river of maternal love, it's something way bigger than that, and it's, to me anyway, it has a very healing quality to it. And yeah, it was, I don't know, it was a powerful metaphor to work with.
I want to invite people to, if you have any questions now, please do turn on your microphone and ask one. But if there aren't any questions at this moment, we are going to do our creative exercise, the paper dolls exercise, led by Pippa. And you might want to share something after we've done that, but just to open up the floor in case there's any questions now before we start that. Okay, Pippa, over to you. And obviously feel free to work alongside with us, or just watch this and then go off and do it by yourself at a later time. But we're going to do it in real time here.
Okay, so what I'm going to invite you to do is to make a chain of paper dolls, which is like something that quite a few people have said to me they did in their childhood. Some people have memories of doing it. So it'll be a little chain of people that starts like a swan and will open out like so. And we're going to use that to have a little reflection about our own maternal lineage. And this is an exercise that I ran with every single woman who became part of the project. So I have hundreds and hundreds of these little chains of paper dolls, and they've been exhibited So if you start with a piece of paper, and then we're going to bend it into three so that it forms a zigzag. So you're aiming for that bent into three. So you're bending one way and then the other. So you should ultimately end up with something that looks like that. That looks good. Okay, and then on the front of this, you're going to draw a person, and you do not need to have any particular drawing abilities. The important thing is that the arms reach to the sides, so that they come right across to the sides. So I'll draw something very simple and then show you what I come up with. This is when people don't believe that I'm an artist, when they see my things on here. So you want something a bit like this. And hope you can see that there. There you go. And the important thing, like I say, is that the arms come across to the sides. And what we're going to do once you've got your person is to cut it out around the outline, but don't cut there and here where the arm touches the side, because those will be the bits that connect it together. This is nice to do this with you, Lucy. We've not done this before.
We haven't, and both of our backgrounds are in creativity and motherhood, as well as being working artists in our own right. But you know, creativity and motherhood as being intimately connected is a passion of both of ours. Yeah. I've got 2 books on that. I've got 3 books. I've got Moods of Motherhood, which is all about the various facets of motherhood. I've got The Rainbow Way, all about creativity and motherhood and that urge to create when you've got small children and don't know how. And then Creatrix, for any woman who wants to create. So yes, it's a passion of both of ours. And there is something about that thing of motherhood and being around, you know, pens and paper and plasticine and clay again, and not having to do things perfectly because you're doing them with very little people, that can be very freeing for a lot of women who might have written themselves off as creative or artistic, and suddenly, you know, they're able to just immerse themselves in creative play again, and it can be very, very freeing and nourishing.
Yeah, I always loved it at sort of toddler groups, when you'd find that all the children had run off from the table and the parents are still there with the plasticine or whatever it is. They're getting so involved in it.
Yeah. And even the singing that you do with little children, you know, and the dancing, you know, you can't really do it wrong when they're 2 or 3, and you know, all they need is just to see you doing it and you enjoying yourself, and then they'll join in. So it's such a lovely way to connect with our growing children as well. And
I suppose, yeah, with that young sort of creative part of ourselves that isn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to get it right. And yeah, it's nice and freeing, isn't it? Yay. So when you have them, yeah, they should open out into 3 like so.
And if they don't, if you've mucked up somewhere, it's okay. That's what sellotape exists for.
Exactly. However they come out is absolutely fine. In the very first workshop that I ran, one woman, she got to this point and she was getting very frustrated with it all. And then she just chopped all the heads off. And I literally was looking at her and I did not know what to do. I was like, I was not expecting that. And it turned out there was a whole sort of story that, you know, then evolved out of that. But I was like, wow, that's a strong response. But yeah, hopefully they come out something like this. And if their arms aren't quite attached or whatever, that's fine too.
Fabulous.
They are looking great, Nancy. Fantastic.
Well
Oh, I love those. They're great shape.
oh, great.
Brilliant. Okay, so now the idea is that these are going to represent left to right your, let me get this the right way around. It doesn't actually matter too much, but yeah, yourself on the left, your mother in the middle, and your maternal grandmother, so your mum's mum on the right hand side. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to write down at least 3 words describing each of those people. You may not know or have known your maternal grandmother, but you may have heard about her or had a sort of sense of the character that she was, maybe through your mum. If it doesn't feel like that fits for you, like I was running this workshop recently and someone said, actually, it was my dad's, you know, mum that I was really close to. So she created her own lineage, how she wanted to. So my invitation is that it's yourself, your mother and her mother. But if you know, want to change that up at all to fit for your situation, then that's totally fine as well. So onto each person, a word that describes them. I'll give you an idea here of some that we've got from someone already. So this woman here, so this is her. She wrote more than 3 words. She wrote a few things. She said, love for my child, inquiring, loving, anxious, trying really hard, bursting with pride and passionate. And for her mum, she said, selfish, loving, shut down and caring. And for her nan, she had hard, funny, hardworking, game for a laugh, and bitter. So quite a range of different things. So, but what I'm just, no need to use any of these, but just, it was just an example of, you know, any sort of words that you might use to describe that person.
And what's lovely in that example that you gave is just that those very almost opposite qualities can exist and do exist in an individual, because often we can get quite polarized about thinking, you know, somebody's either good or they're bad, or, you know, but actually we can have lots of very contradictory qualities in the same person. So it's really, really good to kind of give space for both the bad and the good, you know, on those, seeing the fullness of each of these people.
Absolutely. And one thing I find interesting is that I've done this exercise hundreds of times myself in the different workshops, and different things will come up each time that I'm doing it with looking at myself and my mum and her mother. So it's not a definitive thing.
Mm.
And yeah, if you have more to say than 3 or less, that's absolutely fine. That's just a suggestion.
So I'm going to encourage people to continue this exercise as long as you need to after the call has finished. I'm just aware of our time together.
Over involved then and forgetting the time.
If you'd like to hold up your little people, do. If you don't feel comfortable, that's absolutely fine. I mean, it's unlikely that people are going to be able to read most of them. I actually did connections between us in terms of what the threads of us are. So I've on all of our arms I've got creative, because we're three very creative women, and then on the bottom of our skirts I've got autistic, because we've discovered that going down our female line. And then some of the connections go through, like knitting goes all the way through there, whereas Greece and a passion for Greece jumps from my granny to me, whereas labyrinths and a passion for labyrinths goes from my mother to me. So it was nice seeing those little connections. I did that.
That's really interesting, because that's often what I ask people to look for, is the connections, the patterns, and often people find that things leap from the grandmother to the grandchild, but also that there can sometimes be things that come all the way down and through. So yeah. And
would anybody else like to share any of the words that they put on their little people, or any thoughts or realizations that came up whilst you were doing it? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. First, brilliant book. And Lucy, everything that you were talking about, you're trying to make sure happened through the book happened. That you felt like you were in a circle of women. It really was the emotional gamut that you went through. I don't have any children, so this was very interesting for me to read. I could not have children, so I'm dealing with my own issues. But what I found that went through is my maternal grandmother died when my mother was 3. And she died as a result of my mother's birth. And so my mother had a great deal of grief and loss and blame in her life that she never talked about till she was 80 and a few years before she actually died, which was in 2020. But her mother lost 2 children, tragically. And so she was dealing with loss, and then coming from Italy and coming to nothing and being so dirt poor into the United States. And so she had a lot of grief, but still was nurturing. She sacrificed. She knew that she might die when she had my mother, but she still had that baby. She could have given that baby up and had an abortion. She did not. And this was 1932. So my mother was always a very caring, deep, loving mother, always trying to be the best mother, trying to overdo sometimes. And she was tough. She grew up without a mother. Her sister, who was 10 years older, raised her. And so there was a lot of tough love, but deep loss. And then when I looked at mine, the word loss came up again, because I could not have children. So that sense of loss around a child, a mother, just permeates through. But there's still this caring, this empathy, this great nurturing that was also shared through the lineage from my grandmother to my mother to me. So
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's really powerful to hear. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share anything that they wrote on theirs?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I experienced some surprise. For myself, what I put down was reflective, sad, and hopeful. My grandmother, quiet, old, and soft. And then for my mother, something that she often described herself as a pepper pot. And touch, I loved her touch and didn't feel I got enough. And soft. Her body was soft, her cheeks were soft. And the soft is in both my mother and my grandmother. And I was also interested that My grandmother was an immigrant from Sweden. My mother being first generation and not speaking English until she had to go to school. And then I'm more, just assimilated white WASP person. The Swedish is not visible. It's not a tradition that I carry. And my reaction to the book is I have a real loneliness that I didn't have the kind of care that a midwife gives. The birth keeper of Bethlehem was just mind-blowing and healing, great healing for me. But there has been a lack of connection with other women and with a tradition of women that I still feel a lack. And I have 2 daughters that I'm very close to, and they are close to me, and 1 granddaughter. So it's looking brighter as the generations move forward.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nancy. I agree, and that's what we're really hoping with our books and the work that we do through Womancraft, is bringing women together, bringing women's voices together and out, so that it is a brighter, softer, more nurturing culture of women that our daughters, granddaughters, all the girls in our communities, and so on and so forth, will feel, will actually experience the nurturance that we all need. Pippa, do you have anything you would like to say in closing before we finish up? Is there anything that's left unsaid?
No, I think just that it's been a real delight. I've just been really touched by your words. Thank you, those of you who've shared, and thank you for everyone who's been here. It's I can't really describe it, but it's an incredibly powerful thing to think that words that I've written have reached someone else. It's just it's a very powerful reflection that and it's very nice to have this way to do it, and to sort of see people face to face, and to get a sense of readership, and it makes me have a sense that it's worthwhile. That the work's worthwhile, that the book's worthwhile, and that at times, obviously, a project like this has its struggles and challenges and moments when you think, why am I doing this? So it's really lovely to get the sense that the words in some ways have touched people. So yeah, thank you.
Well, they definitely have, and I know that the book, and even just this conversation, this workshop here, is going to inspire more women to do this sort of thing in their own communities, in their own creative practice, with their own, friends, mothers, sisters. So it's powerful work that is unfolding. So thank you for playing your part in that.
That's great, thank you.
Our next book club is the 11th of May, and it will be Malia Keaton-Digby, who is one of our US authors. And it is to celebrate, this was to celebrate UK and Ireland Mother's Day, Mothering Sunday. And the May one is to celebrate US Canada Mother's Day, which falls in the middle of May. So that's going to be the 11th of May at 5 p.m. UK time, because that's what works best for our author. And so we will be discussing The Hero's Heart and The Heroine's Club. They are 2 12-month curricula that Malia put together for women to lead groups of mothers and sons, mothers and daughters, through a nourishing, nurturing, creative way of building self-esteem, building community together. They're really powerful books. We ran our own heroines club with my women's group and all of our daughters. Beautiful cover art by Arna Bartz, and this is the hero's heart, which was an answer to the many women who loved the heroines club and said, but I want something like that for my sons. You know, this is really important, and we can't just leave it to the dads. We can't just leave it to the men. We want, as mothers, to have a way to bond with our sons and to pass on the important things that they need to learn as they move into manhood. And finally, just to say that next week, end of next week, it's busy around here, Descent and Rising, Women's Stories and the Embodiment of the Inanna Myth is coming out, launching from Carly Mountain is the author. Beautiful cover work, absolutely adore it, by a great Dutch artist, Mika Haken. And really excited for this to come out. It's had massive pre-orders, and the pre-orders are on their way out. They were sent out at the beginning of this week. So do get your hands on this. It's all about the heroine's journey, the journey of descent and rising, using the story of Inanna as an outline for what this journey looks like. So, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to those who are listening in to a recording or watching the recording. And I hope to see you at the next one on the 11th of May. Pippa, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for being here.
Cheers.